Hey guys, got more random battles for you. Let's get into it. I start off with my Kilowattrel, they start off with the Clawitzer. They immediately switch into the Alolan Muck. I go for the U-turn, get a nice early pivot into my Gyarados. I immediately start going for the Dragon Dance right away, get those boosts, he goes for the knockoff, gets that poison, and gets rid of my Life Orb. I then fire off a boosted Earthquake through a huge chunk, but Muck just hangs on, goes for the Poison Jab, but Gyarados just hangs on, but then goes down to the Poison. Zapdos 2.0 decides to come out, go for the Thunderbolt, take out the Muck. They then decide to switch into the Bronzong. I go for the U-turn, get a little bit of damage, get a nice pivot into my Kyogre, get that rain going, they decide to set up a light screen. I then go for the Water Spout, do a huge chunk, but that light screen saves them, set up some Stealth Rock, go for another Water Spout, take out the Bronzong. Cannon Clawboy then decides to make an appearance. I decide to switch back into the Kilowattrel. He goes for the Dragon Pulse, does a huge chunk, but I just hang on. They then switch back into the Houndoom. I go for the T-Bolt, do barely anything thanks to the screens. The rain goes away. They go for the Sucker Punch, but it fails because I went for the Roost. Get some health back. I then go for the U-turn, do a little bit, and pivot back into the Kyogre. Take some damage for the rocks, get that rain going again. He goes for the Fire Blast, does barely anything. They then switch back into the Clawitzer. I go for the Origin Pulse, do barely anything to the claw over there. The light screen goes away. I then switch into my Appleton, take some damage from the rocks, he goes for the Dragon Pulse, takes out my Apple. I go back into my Zapdos 2.0, he decides to switch back into the Houndoom. I go for the Hurricane, almost take out the Doom. Rain's still coming down, goes for the Sucker Punch again, I go for the Roost, get myself back to full health. The rain finally goes away, he goes for a Sucker Punch, but I'm all the way up at full. Go for the Thunderbolt, take out Houndoom. My opponent then goes into the Drifblim. I go for the Terra Electric Thunderbolt, take him out in one shot with the crit. My opponent then forfeits. Good game. At this time I ask you guys to please like, comment, share, and subscribe as it really helps the channel. Without further ado, let's get into game 2. I start off with Iron Bundle, they start off with the Basculin. They immediately switch into the King Gambit to resist my Freeze Dry, but I get the Lucky Freeze. I then decide to go for the Flip Turn, get a nice bit of damage, and use it to pivot into my Hariyama. They're chilling in the ice over there, get a little bit of leftovers back. I activate my Burn Orb, they then use this time to switch into the Pelipper, get the Drizzle going, I go for the Close Combat, do about half the Pelipper, get that defense lower. I take a little bit of burn damage. I then decide to switch into my Quagsire, he goes for the Hurricane, does a nice chunk to Quagsire. I get some lefties back. They then decide to switch back into the Frozen King Gambit, I use this time to set up some spikes. They decide to throw out over there, go right for the Swords Dance. I keep setting up my hazards over here. They get some leftovers back, and so do I. They then go for the Kowtow Cleave, Quagsire eats that up, go for the Earthquake, do a huge chunk to King Gambit. Get some lefties back on both sides. He goes for an Iron Head, Quagsire eats that up as well. I fire off another Earthquake, take out the King Gambit. Pelipper decides to come in again, gets that rain set up, goes for a Hurricane, takes out Quagsire. I then go back into the Iron Bundle, go for the Freeze Dry, take out the Pelipper. He then decides to go into the Azelf. I go for the Hydro Pump, do a huge chunk, but Azelf just hangs on. He goes for the Psychic, takes out my Iron Bundle. I just have to go back into the Hariyama, go for the Bullet Punch, take out the Azelf. My opponent then decides to go into his Basket Legion, takes those hazard damage, goes for the Wave Crash, takes out Hariyama. Takes some recoil damage, rain finally goes away. I then go into my Iron Leaves, he goes for the Wave Crash, but I tank that pretty nice. Go for the Leaf Blade, take him out. Budget Salamence then decides to come in, take some hazards damage, goes for the U-turn, takes out my Iron Leaves. He uses this to pivot into his last mon, the Alolan Raichu. I then decide to go into my Heracross. He goes for the Terra Fighting, Psychic, takes me out in one shot. My last mon is then the Gardevoir. I trade that Surge Surfer, go for the Moonblast, take him out. He then goes back into the Roaring Moon, takes a little bit more hazard damage. I go for the Moonblast, take him out. Good game. Alrighty, let's get into that last game. I go with my Florges, they start off with the Berserker. I immediately switch into my Groudon, get that song going. He decides to set up some Stealth Rocks. He then switches into his Spirit Tomb. I use his time to go for the Precipice Blaze, do about half, he gets some leftovers back. I then decide to start dancing with some swords. He goes for the Will-O-Wisp, gives me that burn. Groudon keeps dancing with his swords, gets that attack boost again. He goes for the Foul Play, takes out my Groudon. Florges decides to come back in, takes some hazard damage. He decides to switch back into the Berserker. I go for the Moonblast, do barely anything, even with the crit. The Dancing Duck decides to make an appearance, takes a little bit of damage. He goes for the Iron Head, but I resist that. He takes some Life Orb damage. He then decides to switch back into the Spirit Tomb. I go for the Aqua Step, do barely anything. Get that speed boost, take some damage. I then decide to go for the Terra Water Aqua Step. Use that extra power to get the boost and kill, get the Moxie. My opponent then switches into the Jolteon. I go for the Aqua Step, take out Jolteon in one shot, get another boost. The Don Crow decides to come in, goes for the Sucker Punch, takes out my Quacklevel. He gets a Moxie boost of his own. I then go back into the floor just for the third time, take some damage, go for the Moonblast, take him out. His Berserker then comes in for the third time. I use this time to switch into my Blissey, take some rocks damage, he goes for the Iron Head, takes out my Blissey. I then switch into my Cloth, take some rock damage. He decides to switch into his Gothitelle. I go for the Crab Hammer, do barely anything. He gets some lefties back. I then go for the knockoff, do a good chunk, get rid of his leftovers. He goes for the Psychic, knocks me down to a little bit below half, activates the Anger Shell, I get that boost. I go for another knockoff, take off Gothitelle. Floatzel then decides to come in. He goes for that Terra Water Aqua Jet, takes out the Cloth. I then decide to switch into my Iron Leaves, take some damage. He decides to switch back into the Berserker. I go for the Leaf Blade, he just hangs on. I go for another Leaf Blade, take out the Berserker. He goes back into the Floatzel. Goes for the Ice Spinner, Iron Leaves just hangs on. Go for the Leaf Blade, take out the Floatzel. Good game. Alrighty, that's the video. Please let me know what you guys think down below and stay tuned for future content. Peace!